The first videos I ever put all of my heart into were my Parappa videos. I spoke about what went on in them, their impact on rhythm games as a whole, the wild merch they spun off, and even the underrated anime that I still recommend to anyone with even a passing interest. While I touched on Lammy back then, I had the least experience with it, only having owned a little shabby copy for a year or so. Well, just like the Dreamcast, Lammy was released in 1999. It's turning 25, so it felt like the perfect time to dive in head first. Often on YouTube, or when you look up reviews of Lammy, you always hear the same things. The story is insane, the gameplay is fun, but it's not as good as Parappa 1. Unfortunately, with sequels, that's almost always the main complaint, and that tends to drive sales into the ground once word gets out. The unfair comparison is what the creator, Masaya Matsuda, was trying to get away from when he thought that instead of making a Parappa sequel, he'd make a psychedelic non-sequel. Of course, once something is successful like Parappa was in Japan, Sony was not going for the idea of doing something different. They absolutely wanted there to be even higher sales on the sequel, a direct sequel, and their misguided marketing insisted that the growing age of the audience was what they had to market to, as well as shoehorning in the rapping dog as much as they could. The audience issue had been a thing since the very beginning, with a game that's too hard for littles, technically too easy for adults, but too cutesy for teens. Rodney Greenblatt, the character designer and a major presence in the creation of the series, always seems to bring up the lack of audience understanding from Sony's perspective. In an interview with an IGN reporter in August of 1999, he was asked about the overtly sexualized marketing, and he said,
"I don't like it. I think it's just Sony trying to torture us. Sony told us we couldn't have the hell part of the game for the US market, and then they bring out these ads which totally flaunt, well, they're just torturing us."
With that, he's always been the first to recognize how risky and possibly how much of a financial detriment the decision was to not make a direct sequel to Lammy. Here's a snippet from GameDeveloper.com.
"It was supposed to be the sequel to Parappa, but Matsuda doesn't think in a linear way. I actually do. I'm very strategy-oriented, sort of progressive about the way I do things. But Matsuda always wants to turn everything upside down and do it backwards. He didn't want Parappa as the main character. He wanted a new character where Parappa was just a friend who would appear later on. I was like, I don't know about that. I think we should do a Parappa game. But they were like, no, Matsuda knows what he's doing. He's a genius."
Both Matsuda and Greenblatt are fantastic artistic thinkers, but pretty often when they speak on their ideologies, it seems as though Matsuda is more of the risk-taking type, who's less interested in success and more interested in the integrity of the vision. When it comes to the chances I tend to take artistically, I fall more in line with Matsuda. But even so, the Parappa products are just that, products for people to pay for and to play, and a big corporation has ownership of both it and the creators, for a certain amount of time, to milk as much money out of it as they can. With art, there's always the fine line of making art for an audience and making work just for you. At the end of the day, you have to make money to live, and while I absolutely admire and love the vision we unabashedly get from Matsuda, Greenblatt is right about how overblown the ideas in not just Lammy, but in the series as a whole teeter-totter on being acceptable and functional for a video game. I do have criticisms that will come up about playability and story, but I want to say here and now that regardless of how incohesive things are within Lammy, I absolutely love it. With every day that's passed since I first played, it's growing to be possibly my favorite of the three. As we go on, I'll discuss why that is, but first, let's get into the story, and most importantly, the music. While Parappa went for music based in the surging rap world just 3 years earlier, Matsuda decided that Lammy would go for the rock genre, purely because he saw rap as something of a trend that was bound to die out. In a sense, all music is like that, with huge hits and artists forcing supremacy of that genre for a time. This shift in musical direction was also going to mean a shift in visuals, and more so, in the way the story was told. When questioned about the story direction in an interview, Greenblatt said,
"They were pushing the PlayStation to its limits with that game, to make it that much more involved. And the story was crazy and wild. I wasn't even sure that it was going to work. And the whole thing started to look really psychedelic and not very heavy metal or new wave. I was thinking that we should do more of a goth thing like The Cure, but they didn't go for it." though they did end up incorporating every genre of rock in the game.
Pretty often, this game is compared to a trip, and just looking at some of the stages and colors, it's obvious enough. But I find the story to actually be way more of an anxiety attack. Medically speaking, panic attacks happen when there's either physical or mental stimulation that overwhelms the body. It can happen for a ton of reasons, like too much physical activity, certain medications, or even a jolt of stress. It can last 5 minutes, 30, or even up to an hour. The story of Lammy takes place within 15 minutes, and as it goes on, she gets more and more irrational in what she sees around her, what she hears, and what she plays. Our first introduction to Lammy is her sitting in a burger joint with Masan and Katy Cat. Right out of the gate, she's hunched over, insecure and uncertain about her instrument abilities, but more so, unconfident about her very existence. A group of guys barge in, advancing on them in a way none of them seem to be into, and this is where we see that the only way Lammy doesn't get all clammed up is when Katy throws a guitar her way. She plays on top of them and knocks them out eventually. Just like that, we know what Lammy is going to use as her weapon. Stage 1 kicks off with a Parappa 1 reference. Apparently Lammy was involved in that iconic bathroom rap scene, but she doesn't rap, so she took double the time to pee. What she was late to is an amateur show for her, Katy, and Masan's band, Milk Can. But apparently, they found Master Onion to feature on vocals. So the tutorial song slowly guides you through every button prompt you see, and it's very similar to the tone and pace of the Dojo Chop Chop song in the original. Which, I'm happy to report, this is the only song in the game that feels anything like the original. Halfway through the performance, Lammy's guitar swaps with a vacuum, and Master Onion's thesis by the end is that she has the power to use anything as a guitar, because it's all in the mind. Stage 2 is where the panic attack kicks in, because Lammy has woken up late for a major show she needs to be a key player in. She's got 15 minutes to get there, and it won't be easy. As she storms down the street, she's blocked by a major crowd gathering in front of a huge fire. Of course, nonsense ensues. The Lammy has to end up donning a big hose and helping the fire dog out. She panics at first, until she sees a big casino sign that reminds her of Master Onion and how he imagines his defunct dojo as a casino, where he makes huge money. So now the hose is the guitar. This song is easily my favorite. The style of guitar funk is twangy, like they're using some effect pedal. The song's lyrics are very much about being able to do whatever you feel confident doing, and how you've got to fake that confidence at time to make it happen. Stage 3 starts with the firehouse dog feeding Lammy an oversized pizza she gets super bloated by. She's only got 11 minutes to make it, but as she's running, she wipes out right in front of a crowd of women parading about, ready for their upcoming child adoption. It's very odd indeed. I feel like something related to birth or bleeding always comes about in female coming-of-age media though, so I guess I expected it. Since Lammy is so bloated, the lead doctor of this weird little baby store mistakes her for being pregnant and rushes her inside. As soon as Lammy gets in, her stomach swells down, and so the doctor forces her to help calm some babies to sleep. It makes me laugh to see a baby bunny get turned into a guitar, but I'm here for it. The vibe of this song is like a rockabilly fantasy, something you'd hear in a Johnny Rockets restaurant. The lyrics of the song are focused on the babies and how they act up when they need food, shelter, and so on. It's not the most interesting concept, but the in-between with the na-na-nas and the ma-ma-mas blends it all together really well. Once the baby in your arms is asleep, you get to pass to the next area. At this point on my first playthrough, I got the sense that every stage was going to be its own genre, and I liked that a lot. But I did start wondering if the lyrics were going to be a secondary thing then. And I think that's true for the most part in hindsight, though I will say the actual instrumentation, especially with Lammy's guitar interludes, are incredibly well done and catchy. And because this game isn't based so much on rhymes like rap music is, it actually feels like the songs are catchier and open to more languages to enjoy. With 8 minutes left, Lammy races out the front door to end up on a skateboard that then smashes her into a plane's cockpit. She's now mistaken for the co-pilot, and so they take off. This song surprised me, being a straight-up metal-influenced piece. It has heavy drums and very quick-worded lines, and then it does nice relief interludes with more singy song moments. It's great, and definitely a standout song. Think System of a Down. Once the music is over, you land the plane and park, before realizing your guitar is missing. So stage 5 is where you end up in a custom guitar shop. It makes a joke at the expense of guitar shoppers, wanting something really cheap, but needing it to be the best sounding thing. It's like wanting an American Fender Stratocaster out of a $200 Squire. It just isn't gonna happen. So the shop owner forces Lammy to break out a chainsaw, head to a nearby tree, and shape her very own guitar. While the music in this one sounds nice, the actual voice of the beaver shop guy annoyed me so much. He does this squeaky, insecure thing a lot, and I don't know, it just wasn't my vibe. But one of the big jokes in this song is during the hook. Joe Chin is the big dog who was rich and tried to take Sunny Funny from Parappa in the previous title. Now, apparently, he's got all kinds of ridiculous businesses going on that are basically frauds. And when we talk about the arcade game later, we're going to talk about Joe Chin more. Don't you worry. With 2 minutes left, Lammy sprints outside, but as she rushes past the door, her underwear gets hooked onto the knob, and she's swung to a bizarre fantasy island far, far away. Her whole life flashes before her eyes, and when she emerges from her Looney Tunes-style hole in the ground, a manager scoops her up and takes her inside, thinking she's the guitarist for the psychedelic pop-punk band playing a big show. The lead singer says she'll help Lammy get back home if she plays a song with them, and so Lammy does, of course. It's one of the weirder songs in the game, with oddly muted vocals that go very, very quickly. Playing this one is one of the most difficult, because it really wants you to freestyle since the timing of the song is in such a fast-paced measure. The only way I got through this thing was total BS, hitting random buttons at different times every other line. It's a mess, but I gotta give props to the stage design. I love how they found a way to have the crowd doing a wave. When the song is over, you're sent right into the next title card for the final stage. The lead singer gives you a transportation device to use that sends over a fax of an emo Lammy called Rammy, who's supposed to be in this world as their actual guitarist. Rammy wants to challenge you to a duel, but you instead fax yourself over to Milk Can's concert hall. As Lammy runs in, you get to see a little bit of what went into them getting a concert flyer, choosing outfits for the night, the band logo choice, and once she gets to the backstage door, she realizes that all three of them are late and must have been on some pretty wild adventures themselves. Now, we are at the final song, probably my favorite in the game too. This song is the epitome of pop rock, and the lyrics are all about early career jitters, but overcoming all of that for the sake of the show. It's super upbeat and awesome. The voice actress for Katy Cat absolutely kills it, hitting some very high notes with ease. And once the song is completed, it pushes us right into the credits. Now, I almost missed this on my first run, but while you're on stage select screen, if you keep moving over to the right, there's an alternate storyline that's fully focused on Parappa. If this were a modern day game, there's no way it wouldn't be $10 DLC. While this is certainly an optional bit, they go so far as to have cutscenes, voice acting, and even fully rearranged songs and vocals. It gives us a hint as to what PS1 Parappa 2 would have been like, though I am not the biggest fan of what's here. This felt like a way to please the people who didn't want to play a game that didn't have Parappa in it, but they kind of just threw him in there, and it shows. His storyline makes little to no sense, and it's incredibly expedited in length. There is no tutorial stage 1 for Parappa, and the story title cards let us know we aren't doing things in 15 minutes, instead taking place over 1 week. We start with a cutscene of Parappa, PJ DJ, Sunny Funny, and Katy eating while talking about milk can forming. Katy is trying to see if Parappa will be a groupie of sorts, helping out behind the scenes. After Parappa seems a little bummed that he won't actually be doing anything musically, we're shoehorned into a rap version of the Firehouse Dog song. The song keeps the funk quality about it, but the lyrics are certainly different, which I actually thought was awesome that they bothered to do all that. Parappa's rhymes transport you back to the OG, but I noticed something immediately. The audio quality between the Master and Parappa sounds worlds apart. The Master feels very crispy, just like the rest of the game, but Parappa's voice sounds like it's recorded on a totally different mic and mixed in a tin can. I hate to say it, but that audio for Parappa is the same for all of his parts. It drove me a little crazy, and I don't know why that would even be the case. Unless during development they ran out of time and added it in because of studio demand. Anything is possible. Stage 2 starts with PJ, Parappa, and Sunny drawing up plans for what the Milk Can stage set design should look like. Of course, PJ wants to make it food-themed. It ends as quickly as it begins, and we play through an alternate Baby Shop song. Yeah, the story does not seem to really align with the stages at all, and I'm just gonna stop even bringing up the absurdity there. Instead of the rockabilly style the song was before, it's a slowed down beat and vocal performance now. The theme is the same, expressing how the babies need to get put to sleep. Stage 3 opens with Sunny giving Katy Cat a potential costume to wear, and then Katy starts explaining what the other members of the band are like. This is the only time we see Parappa act like Parappa, where he thinks up some crazy, scary version of what events could happen and flies off the handle. The theme of the metal song changes a bit this time, more focused on the melancholy of times changing in your life. It's about the little things, like a train you used to take to school every day. At the start of Stage 4, we get a Joe Chin commercial about preserving nature, and how you should send over a bunch of money right now. For what exactly? Well, they don't tell you. But of course, undermining the first commercial, Joe Chin also sells chainsaws, so go ahead and cut some trees. Which is what the next song is about. This one is tough, by the way. You really have to set your own beat, because if you follow the song, you're almost always going to get a bad rating. It really kicked my butt. Stage 6 cuts to Parappa and PJ wanting to start a rock band, heading into the guitar shop and coming out with an entirely different type of equipment. Say hi to Prince Fleetswallow, by the way. Now, as per the main storyline, we're playing music with that strange singer on another island. I'll talk about the specifics later, but the US version of Lammy had a lot of regional changes. The original Stage 6 is supposed to take place in Hell, and the lyrics changed a lot in the Lammy plot. But here, we get a little closer to that original intention, talking much more about behaving so you get sent back to Earth, or Heaven. Now on the last stage, the Friday night concert, PG is shaping out their instruments they brought to be more rock-centered, somehow. And the final Milk Can song doesn't feature Lammy at all, but there are still awesome vocals going on. Instead of getting a final Parappa scene, we get a Joe Chin laptop commercial that then leads into Ma-san emailing Messiah Matsuda a huge list of complaints or something. It felt meta in a funny way. I got a kick out of it. Matsuda probably realized this game was going to be a hit for some and a total flop for others. But yeah, that's all we get from the Parappa section. It didn't necessarily feel like it needed to happen, but I still really appreciated that they put it in. I must say, this game is way more interesting if you've played some real guitar in your life. Of course, you don't have to, but after every stage, you actually unlock new effectors, as they're called in-game. They're just pedals. On the first playthrough, I didn't even know that the things you were unlocking were usable until I read the manual. The manual for this game is actually really helpful, with tips and tricks, as well as some more info on each character's backstory. There's also a video on YouTube that I'll link below that shows you in more detail what each of the effectors sound like, and it explains how to use them during freestyles. But these effectors are more for you to enjoy audibly, and they don't change the ratings. Speaking of freestyle, much like in Parappa 1, instead of playing beat by beat like the game shows, you're much more likely to do better and get higher ratings if you mess around a little bit. If there's a line that has, let's say, XXO, try double tapping X and O. Then on the next line, play exactly as it says. If you go too overboard, the game doesn't like it, and your rating tanks. Just as it always is, timing on Lammy is tricky. I found that playing on a flat screen, hitting the prompt a second before the cursor is fully over the button worked best. The stage on the desert island was easily the most irritating for me, so my tip for that one, if you blow it like me, is to just go crazy, hit all kinds of buttons. I actually ended up getting a cool rating and finally passed it when I did that. Cool ratings are unlockable on your very first playthrough now, unlike how they were in Parappa 1. When you're in the cool zone, there are no prompts. You just play and make up your own groove. Just try to be consistent with your pattern, or else you can get flunked out of cool. Besides solo and Parappa mode, there is a 2-player co-op and a 2-player versus mode. If you have a real friend to play with, plug in a second controller, or the game thankfully gives you a computer to play with. Typically, you fight or play with Rammy, the emo Lammy, or you play with Parappa, and he does the rap version of the song. Major warning! The audio sounds insane when you play with Parappa because, like I said earlier, his recording sounds like garbage. One consistent thing in the Parappa series is that the character designs are always a standout. Some of them feel very late 90s inspired. some look like they're purely based off of similes, and others are a perfect combo that have been icons to this day. There's a long quote from Greenblatt, the designer, in an IGN interview that really goes into nice details about his character work.
Most of the time I would give them a series of sketches, maybe 3 or 4 choices, and they would choose 1 or 2, then I'd do another 2. Sometimes I'd hit right away, and sometimes I'd have to do it over and over again. The best example is Lammy herself, which took me forever. I did 4 or 5 different Lammys, and number 2 was put in the game. The first fully finished level that they were testing had this other Lammy. They had gone all the way to the animation, and then they asked me to go literally back to the drawing board. Like, for instance, with Lammy, originally she was a cute pink lamb. You know, a real lamb. And I thought that was it. But her legs came out of her head, and she looked awkward playing a guitar. That was the character for a long time. But Matsuro wanted to change her around a little bit. And after lots of tinkering, we scrapped that idea. The second idea is what you see now, and well, she's kind of a lamb. She's got the 2 little horns. With this game, we tried to create characters that would appeal to a slightly older crowd. You know, not the 12 to 14-year-olds. With Lammy, it was the 16 to 18-year-olds we wanted to appeal to.
Lammy changed a lot in design, but it does seem like her pensive and unsure personality was clocked from the start. Katy Cat has looked this good since the beginning, and I love her knockoff Gresh guitar with those 70s-inspired pants. Her personality shines the most in this game, being the go-getter and the positive push everyone around her needs. It's great to hear her singing voice used so prominently too. In all honesty, it could have been her game. Ma-san is mute, but sometimes there will be subtitles for what she says. Her design is supposed to be sexy, but she kind of is an aggressive enigma. There's a pseudo-interview with her and a cutscene for the Lammy arcade machine, and I'm just gonna let her speak for herself. Joe Chin has less of a role in this game, and he's treated more of an ironic rich guy. He's like an Easter egg, if anything, and I wonder if his inclusion is to foreshadow something of a brand deal that could have come for Milk Can if the game had its own sequel. PJ and Sunny look as expected, but I will say, this game feels like it has a bit more fun with these two even though their presences are minimal. They very much feel more lighthearted and goofy, and that's carried on into Parappa 2 on PS2. So with Master Onion, he's the same old master, rapping the same way he always has. I was sad to hear that his dojo got trashed, but it does seem like he made a little business for himself with a karate show. That must be the same show that turns into a couple's karate in Parappa 2. The Firehouse dog, Chief Puddle, has a great song, and I love the fact that he's a Dalmatian, the classic Firehouse icon. He's also got a creepy little smile that's kind of cute. His personality, and most of the master personalities in this, don't shine as bright as in the previous game, or the next one, but there's a nice bit of detail in their outfits as always. Kathy Pillar is gross. Like, I almost can't even look at her. I think it's funny that she's got a hot nurse outfit, but I feel like she looks like one of those aliens in Slither or something. I can't do it. Captain Fuss and Pepper is silly, though his outfit doesn't have too much going on. It's very classic. He has a 1940s pilot mustache that seems a little on the nose, but what is this series without taking irony literally? Paul Chuck is an axe-wielding beaver. He's awesome, and I think it's funny when Lammy hides, thinking he's about to Texas Chainsaw Massacre her. Teriyaki Tokyo looks a lot like Dolores from the Cranberries, even if the music she makes doesn't sound as heavenly. I guess a lot of women had that short haircut back then, so it could just be the timely influence, but I dig it. In the backgrounds of the stages, there are tons of interesting sets, filled with characters you might be able to pick out from the previous game. There are lots of signs and goofy Easter eggs thrown about. My favorite are the jokes on the billboards. The Parappa world seems so full, even if you only see seconds of glances at everything. That's something I really admire about Lammy in particular. It feels otherworldly. Surprisingly, there aren't too many game development issues documented, though I'm sure there were plenty, since in interviews, Greenblatt often says the magic of making Lammy became further and further from fun as things got more challenging and convoluted in the gameplay department. There are pretty good chunks of changes between the Japanese and Euro releases, but the most famous change comes in Stage 6. While exiting the guitar shop, Lammy is supposed to slip on a banana peel and literally go to hell, where she sings with the bizarre animal version of Dolores. In the US, Our version even has her in a different outfit, donning a camo fit on her way to a weirdo island. The song has been edited a lot in order to account for this, and removes all mentions of angels and devils. Like I said, Stage 6's changes are the most egregious. One change I actually like is that the Euro and Japanese ending credit song is an orchestral, melodramatic piece, while in the US, it's a pop-rock ballad sung by Katy Cat. Let's now talk about the changes to the look of the game. Greenblood actually has a YouTube channel that he uploads behind-the-scenes footage of things he worked on, so that's going to come in handy, because he actually gave us access to the first recordings of all in-game cutscenes. In almost all of these VHS scenes, the characters and key art are older variations still in progress. However, Lammy is the fully formed original design we talked about earlier, so you get to see it in action. Now, something I found particularly interesting is that Sunny Funny looks to have a much more integral role in this version of the script, but she was still not intended to be a part of the band. As for unused graphics, it mainly came down to the UI icons they switched out. He used the original fonts and color schemes for the ratings, prompts, and other various bits. And when looking at the facial expressions for Ma-san, since they were probably going to make her more expressive instead of going for the deadpan look, I think the latter idea is simple, but also funnier. There are also little things like a different modeled stage for the final milk can performance. And one major thing left out is that there was actually a fully fleshed out rap scene for Parappa in Stage 1 with Onion. Now in the PS1 release, this isn't a thing, though there is a widely sought after and rare arcade machine called umjammerlammy now. And guess what? You can finally play Stage 1 as the rapping dog. So what is umjammerlammy now exactly? Well, it was released just months after the Japanese PS1 game came out, but it was developed by the firecrackers at Namco. To put that in perspective, 1999 is the year of Tekken Tag, Ace Combat 3, the actual good one, Mr. Driller, Pac-Man World, and more. Physically speaking, this machine is awesome, with a striking design, a great monitor, fun colors, and a pre-Guitar Hero guitar. It was running on Namco System 12, which is actually what Ergai's ran on, so the models look great even now. When this machine was announced, Namco stated that they would be releasing this version of the game to home consoles, but of course it didn't do well. It hardly got out into the world. It was not until February of 2023 that the world was blessed with a ROM, that you, dear listener, can go and download right freaking now. It's no slouch in the amount of content either. You can play as Lammy, Rammy, and Parappa in solo, team, or battle. Let's look at footage of this thing in action for a second, specifically because I want to take a look at those guitars. They look odd, and from the mouths of people who have actually played with this thing, they say it's not the best to control practically. More so with that turntable bit. But apparently it's rarely used. The most important aspect here is getting familiar with the buttons in the center that kind of look like you can move them either up and down, as if you're using a pick or something. It's a really nice detail. I wish I could get my hands on this thing, because I'd probably stand in front of this machine for hours on end. Again, Guitar Freaks from '99 was technically the first mainstream plastic instrument game, but it's really interesting to see how different the Lammy alt was. Even if one way of controller worked and influenced generations of games until now, it makes me happy that a little game about a rock star lamb was charging ahead back then. The other reason to look into this port is that there are tons of litter interviews, most of which I showed earlier, of the Milk Can crew after the success of their first album. It really lets you get to know the characters better, and I found it so endearing. Umjammerlammy sold about 400k in Japan, and half of that in the US. For other territories, it was even less. Parappa 1 sold over 1.3 million in Japan alone, and around 300k in the US by 2003. That doesn't include how much money the releases on PSN, PSP, or the 2017 remaster got. This has been a series of diminishing returns for some time, but Lammy sold the worst of the three by far. Even still, umjammerlammy won E3 '99 Game Critics Awards in the categories Best Puzzle, Trivia, Parlor Game, and Outstanding Achievement in Sound. The game also received the Outstanding Achievement in Original Music Composition Award from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences at the 3rd Annual Interactive Achievement Awards. When speaking about why he thinks the game sold so poorly, Greenblatt tends to attribute it to the fact that
We took too long. We spent 2 years working on Umjammer, and we should have blasted out another Parappa game in a year to keep the ball moving. By the time Lammy came out, there was already lots of other music games coming out, like dancing games, and we were sort of a little behind, I thought, by the time Lammy finally got out there.
1999 was also the year the Dreamcast was released, and it was when the PS2 was announced. Most people were either occupied in saving money for what came next, or they were expecting the next Parappa to be more graphically impressive on the PS2 hardware. But even when Parappa 2 came out on the PS2, it didn't sell great. Part of that is because Parappa was successful in Japan, and in other regions, it was always just a cult hit. Cult hits always mean commercial failures, and while Sony gave Parappa 2 an anime and a McDonald's collab, Lammy got none of that. Well, she did get one really lit PS Underground NYC concert. That's iconic, but how many people actually got to go to that? There were 2 different Lammy shirts you could order back in the day. I'd die to have the baseball tee, but that's all aftermarket stuff. So I don't know, it seemed like Lammy was dead in the water as soon as it went out. Regardless of how fantastic and influential not just Lammy, but the series was and is, it's not a series that had longevity. And a big part of that is Sony's problem. They've had tons of icons that rival Sega's Sonic, like Crash, Toro, Sackboy, Kratos, the list goes on, but they never stick to it. At least not in the US. So, with that being said, I'm severely sad that there isn't another game, but I'm in no way surprised. Now, if you're interested in owning Lammy, the easiest way is to get a PlayStation Network copy on PSP, PS3, or Vita. Physically, there's this version on PS1 that goes for a scary $55 complete, or if you have an authentic Japanese PS1 or a modded system, you can get a Japanese copy for about $20 after shipping. The voices will play in English, and just remember that the O and X buttons are swapped, so keep that in mind. When it comes to merch, you can literally buy Lammy's guitar, but it's rare, and really expensive, and so pretty. Of course, there's also the famous Lammy clock, so you'll never be 15 minutes late again. Then there's the rare set of Lammy and Rammy toys that you'll have to sell your foot for. All in all, I love this game, and this series as a whole. Genuinely, I think I like them all on the same level, which is basically unheard of. That's like Persona levels of quality. Even though they can be hard to play, and even hard to track down, please give any of them a shot, because you cannot go wrong with a little creative music happiness in your life. Thank you very much for watching.